Okay, so let's just dive right in. We've got some really fascinating material today. It's taking us deep into this, well, surprising friction, the kind that happens when different ways of processing information bump up against a world that's just really fixated on speed.
Hmm.
Specifically, we're talking about like what it feels like when someone asks you for an elevator pitch, that quick summary,
Yeah.
and your mind just, well, it doesn't work like that at all.
Right. Doesn't compute sometimes.
So our mission kind of with this deep dive is to really get inside why that demand for compression can feel so jarring. I mean, the source even uses the word. Okay, so let's start right there. With that feeling the source describes. You know the one? Someone asks something that seems simple on the surface, like, what do you need right now?
Or why did that upset you?
Yeah. And instead of a nice, neat sentence popping out, your brain just goes, system. Like the whole thing lights up.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's this feeling that the meaning isn't linear.
Yeah.
It doesn't arrive neatly step by step.
Uh-huh.
It comes more in resonance through fragments.
Yeah.
Could be like a bit of a song lyric.
Yeah.
Maybe a flash of memory, a smell even, or just a phrase you heard once.
Wow.
And the process, the actual building of the full answer, getting to coherence,
Hmm.
it just takes time. The material calls it a process,
Yeah.
right? Not a performance you can just switch on.
Right. And that's immediately where the conflict happens, isn't it?
Totally.
Because of the world, especially like at work or in quick social stuff, it wants that elevator pitch.
Needs it almost.
Yeah, it wants distillation, something quick, easily consumable that kind of confirms its own pace, its own attention span.
Mhm.
And if your answer, the deep, dense, layered one, doesn't show up in that tiny little window, maybe it comes hours later or even days.
Yeah, the moment's gone. The window's closed.
It's just gone.
And what's really interesting here is how consistently that difference gets misread.
Oh, yeah.
It can look like you're being non-compliant, maybe aloof, or just, disengaged.
Like you don't care.
Exactly. But the truth, and this is what the source really unpacks, is that it's just participating differently.
Mm.
The language processing isn't chronological in that strict sense, point A to point B.
Right.
It's described as teleological. It's oriented towards meaning, towards an endpoint of understanding, not just sequence.
Teleological meaning like aimed at a goal.
Kind of, yeah. Aimed at coherence. It's assembling all those fragments, reaching for that feeling of, yes, this is it, not just trying to spit out a quick, compliant answer to satisfy the immediate demand.
So it's like working within a different aspect of time altogether.
Precisely. A completely different sense of time.
Which brings us to that really sharp point the source makes. Demanding that quick answer, that elevator pitch. It's basically asking someone to just discard their whole way of knowing, their fundamental process.
Yeah. It's described as access without reciprocity.
Ooh, say more about that. Access without reciprocity.
Well, it's like you want the output, right? The easily packaged answer, the data point.
Yeah.
But you're not willing to invest in the actual process that creates it. You're not meeting the person where they are.
You just want the thing, not the journey to the thing.
Pretty much. And the material breaks down these different experiences at times so helpfully.
Yeah.
It's the one we mostly run on Chronos.
Okay, Chronos, clock time.
Yep. Linear view, past, present, future, all measured out, external, transactional. It's the timeline where, speed equals competence. And questions demand immediate, sort of quantifiable answers.
Got it. Standard operating procedure for most of the world.
Then there's kairos. That's the ancient Greek idea.
Kairos, I've heard of that.
It's not clock time. It's more like the opportune moment, the rightness of now. It's qualitative relational. It emerges.
So less about the clock, more about the feeling, like knowing the right time to say something.
Exactly that. Guided by a felt sense, not just measurement.
Okay. Chronos. Kairos.
But what's really key here for this discussion is what the source calls GLP time, gestalt language processing time.
Ah, okay, so a third way.
Yeah, and it's called teleological again, because it's not about the linear sequence of Chronos or even just the opportunity of Kairos. It's about coherence.
Coherence. Making sense. Fitting together.
Exactly. The meaning doesn't arrive just because a certain amount of clock time has passed. It arrives when enough of those fragments we talked about have gathered. Enough resonance is built up, and then bang, the gestalt finally forms. The whole picture clicks into place.
Like finding the last piece of a puzzle.
Kind of, yeah. The source connects it to ideas like Taoist unfolding meaning emerges when it's ready, not when it's forced. It's recursive, looping back, rather than just reactive. Anchored in meaning, not the moment. and it's paced by internal pattern recognition, not some external performance expectation.
Wow. Okay, that's a very different way to think about time. The examples in the source really bring this home, don't they?
They really did.
Like the delayed response one, someone asks, "What do you need right now?" Simple question, right?
It's simple.
But inside, maybe you freeze. And it's not because you don't know, it's because the question touches like everything. Multiple timelines, the source says.
Yeah, past needs that got ignored, current needs bubbling up, future needs you're worried about, needs you're suppressing just to get by.
It's huge. And then the assembling starts. But it's not like a conscious search, okay, database, find needs.
No. It's more a scent triggers something. An old blanket, maybe? Or that dry hospital air feeling. A line from a song pops in. A memory of being 6 and feeling totally misunderstood. These aren't random noise. The source calls them signal. They're pieces waiting for the pattern to emerge from them.
Right. And then maybe hours later, maybe even the next day, the answer arrives, fully formed. Something like, I need you to see that my silence wasn't apathy. I needed time. I need my way of knowing to be acknowledged.
Beautifully put. But
the Chronos window slammed shut hours ago.
exactly. The moment passed. The asker moved on.
Or take the other example, living in the eternal now. How, like, a shift in the light or someone's tone of voice can suddenly make something that happened years ago feel like it's happening right now.
Because the system isn't sorting by the calendar, it's sorting by coherence, by pattern.
The theater inside me activates, the source says.
Yeah. If a pattern, maybe an emotional pattern or a relational dynamic, returns, the work of processing it resumes now. It doesn't matter if the original event was 10 years ago.
So GLP time is always asking these deeper questions. What is this moment actually for? What's trying to become visible now?
What am I finally ready to understand or carry forward? Because the pieces finally fit. It's profound, really.
It absolutely is. So this way of experiencing time, it's not just a quirk of processing. The source frames it as like an ethical orientation.
That's a key point.
The slow answer might actually be the only true answer available at that depth.
And silence isn't necessarily emptiness or refusal. It often means the system is busy. It's still assembling.
So speed isn't the virtue here. Resonance is.
Right. And asking for that summary, demanding speed, feels like being asked to abandon that deep coherence just to comply with the clock.
You're asking someone to basically collapse something incredibly complex, maybe even sacred, into something just legible, something easy for you on your timeline.
The response has to be to the internal coherence, not the external clock. And sometimes that means the only ethical thing to do, for both people really, is to wait.
Wait for the truth to arrive.
Yeah, for the real answer.
And this difference, this mismatch in timing and processing, it explains so much about why there's what the source calls participation misread, right? Especially in places like school or work meetings or even doctor's appointments.
Oh, absolutely. The expected way to participate in those settings is usually very chronos-based.
Yes.
Speak up quickly, respond immediately, follow a linear track.
That's seen as normal, competent, engaged.
Right. But for minds working in GLP time, processing through resonance and pattern, that standard mode can feel, well, frankly, incoherent sometimes. It doesn't match the internal reality.
And yet people are constantly pushed to perform within that standard, even if it feels unnatural or impossible.
Exactly. And what GLP participation actually looks like might be, pauses that seem too long to others, or following associative threads that seem like tangents. Needing to come back to a question later, maybe the next day, holding lots of different fragments, sensory bits, time fragments all at once.
And the source is so clear. This isn't disengagement. It's pattern assembly happening live.
But it gets misread constantly. Silence is seen as avoidance or defiance.
You're not answering me.
Right. Or the tangents are seen as distractions, lack of focus. The delayed arrival of coherence is framed as refusal. You're being difficult. Stay on topic.
But the classroom example in the source is just... wow, it's heartbreaking, but also so insightful. The student labeled non-cooperative.
Yeah. And the shift happens when you realize it's often not behavioral, it's temporal. They are participating just in a road the system isn't set up to recognize or value.
So when the teacher, in the example, slows things down, gives 5 minutes for an answer instead of demanding it instantly.
Allows maybe days for reflection instead of just minutes.
Lets them doodle or pace because, as the source says, their theater is assembling.
Then the answer arrives. And it's not reluctant or forced. It comes out fully formed, rich, meaningful,
And they were participating the whole time, just
different, in a rhythm that went unrecognized, unvalued even.
And just think about the sheer emotional labor involved in constantly trying to fake being on time or participating in that neurotypical chronos way.
The source talks about the immense cost. Faking linearity when your thoughts are orchestral. Scripting responses in your head. Having to abandon complex, nuanced truths just to give a simple answer that fits the expected mold.
It's not just tiring, is it? The source uses the word traumatizing.
It can be, because it constantly teaches you that your natural way of thinking is inconvenient, your rhythm is disrespectful, your full self, in its complexity, doesn't quite belong.
Yet people keep trying, don't they? Not necessarily to assimilate completely, but just for that chance of real connection, for reciprocity.
That's the drive, the hope for genuine back and forth.
So true participation then, according to this material, it means being allowed to actually follow the shape of your own internal resonance, not just the pace of the external clock or protocol.
Yeah, I mean, seeing time itself as like a relational ethic, not just a ruler.
It means recognizing that someone deep in thought, maybe silent, maybe connecting seemingly disparate ideas, is actually engaging in deep pattern recognition across layers. They're not just off topic.
Right. And it shifts the burden, really. Instead of asking, why aren't you responding fast enough? The more generative question becomes, what needs to happen here in this space for you to find your coherence? What do you need from me?
Which leads directly into this powerful contrast the source draws, extraction versus reciprocity.
Yeah, this is crucial.
Asking for that answer on your schedule without honoring the internal process needed to actually create it. The source says that's not communication, it's extraction.
Like drilling for oil or something. You just want the resource.
You're taking something without investing in how it's made, without respecting the source.
Exactly. Whereas reciprocity,
Yeah.
that means you invest, you stay. You don't just ask the question and disappear if the answer isn't immediate.
You wait. You maybe even build your own capacity to witness, meaning that emerges differently, not in a straight line, but maybe in waves or fragments that eventually form a whole.
Recognizing that what looks like silence is actually sense-making in progress.
Yeah.
If you stay, if you offer that presence, the constellation emerges, not as a performance forced out too early, but as truth.
As truth. Wow. Okay, this brings us right to the absolute core, I think. The demand for compression. Why the elevator pitch is violence.
Yeah, the language is strong for a reason.
There's this ritual described, isn't there? A neurodivergent person or someone processing in this GLP way offers something complex, layered, full of resonance, maybe showing a deep pattern they've noticed, sharing vulnerability.
And the response they get is often.
Okay, great, but can you sum that up? What's the key takeaway? Just give me the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
The source calls that deep epistemic violence. Epistemic, related to how we know things. Right?
Exactly. Violence against someone's way of knowing. It's a demand, the source says, to strip mine our meaning for your convenience.
Strip mine, wow. It even uses the term cognitive extractivism.
Yeah, expecting these complex inner worlds to be instantly condensed, made perfectly legible, consumable, without any reciprocal effort or investment from the person asking.
It's not a conversation. It's framed as a data harvest. You want the answer, not the process.
The fruit, not the soil it grew in. The map, not the actual landscape.
And this compression, the source explains, it's also a form of erasure.
Because the elevator pitch flattens everything. It demands that complexity be made quick and clean, easy to digest. But often the real value is in the slowness, the recursion, the nuance, the resistance to being pinned down too early.
For GLP minds, meaning unfolds, right, it carries all that extra stuff, the scent, the song, the memory, the metaphor. It arrives in chords, not single notes.
Exactly. And forcing that compression, cutting it short, the source likens it to severing a limb. What you get isn't the whole truth. It's a fragment ripped away from its living context.
So insisting on that summary, it's not just impatience, it's communicating something really damaging.
Yeah, it's saying, I don't actually have time for your coherence. Your pace is inconvenient for me. The actual shape of your knowing needs to change to fit my limited attention span.
The source pulls no punches here, calling it dominance disguised as pragmatism.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a politics of pacing at play, whose time gets recognized as valuable, productive, whose silence is honored as thoughtful, and whose is pathologized as resistant or defiant.
Whose tangents are seen as creative exploration versus just being disorganized.
Exactly. And this fundamentally shapes who gets heard, who gets trusted, who gets invited back to the table. For minds that need that time, for deep patterning, for coherence to build, it's not trivial. It's a matter of survival, of being able to exist authentically.
There's that beautiful metaphor the source uses, writing symphonies, not scripts.
I love that one.
A linear script just moves from point A to B predictable.
Right. But GLP is described more like composing across multiple dimensions at once. An image connects to a film line, connects to a scent, connects to an echo of past trauma, connects to a feeling made visible through metaphor.
It's orchestral, systemic. You can't just compress a symphony into one catchy hook without losing almost everything.
Exactly. The elevator pitch is a linear script. GLP minds are often writing these multidimensional symphonies inside, asking them to summarize before the music is resolved.
Yeah.
You don't get a better answer. You get a premature, distorted one. Maybe just noise.
Which then frames the idea of refusal as integrity.
Yeah. Saying no.
But it's not saying no to communication itself, is it? It's saying no to its reduction, to its distortion.
Right. Refusing the elevator pitch not out of spite, but out of fidelity to the truth as it's actually forming. If you genuinely want understanding, the source implies, stop asking for the short version. Instead, offer the conditions, the time, the space, the patience that allow deep resonance to emerge.
That is reciprocity.
That's the invitation.
So what is actually needed then? If not compression, what? The material points towards reciprocal presence.
It's a deep longing described in the source, not just for tolerance or grudging accommodation, but for an actual ethics of staying. Being witnessed without that constant pressure to speed up, simplify, conform.
Which requires creating spaciousness without pressure.
Permission slowness. Recognizing that pauses aren't empty voids to be filled awkwardly. They're gestational spaces. Something is forming.
It's not hesitation out of uncertainty, necessarily. It might be about being exacting, needing to get it right.
And right isn't just factually correct in a linear sense.
Yeah.
It's resonantly true. It feels complete, aligned. Rushing aborts that process. It demands a surface answer when depth is still taking shape.
It connects to that idea. Processing time is not delay, it's depth.
Yeah. Time isn't just a container you're failing to fit into. It's more like a tuning fork. The process isn't idle waiting. It's aligning frequencies, finding the right entry point, the right chord to express something complex without collapsing it into caricature.
And witnessing this process, the source suggests, requires patience, because it's like building a cathedral from shattered stained glass.
Wow.
Reconstructing wholeness from fragments the world often told us weren't important or didn't count.
Because for minds wired this way, things others might dismiss as fluff, a metaphor, a fleeting memory, a misremembered song lyric, a smell, a line from a book. These aren't distractions. They are core epistemologies. They're the building blocks of meaning.
So dismissing them, saying just get to the point, is essentially asking someone to dismember their own meaning-making process.
Metaphors aren't detours. They're bridges to understanding.
Which leads to the praxis of waiting with, what does it actually look like to practice this? Not just tolerating the process, but actively honoring it.
Yeah. Seeing the act of staying present while someone assembles their thoughts, allowing space for their coherence to form as an act of profound relational care.
It's kind of a radical act in our hyper-fast world.
It really is. It communicates trust. It says, I trust something meaningful is forming here. I don't need to control your pace. I don't need to understand every single fragment as it appears to remain present with you. I value the complex you that is emerging.
It reframes the question you might ask someone, doesn't it? Maybe instead of what's wrong, it's, can you stay while I find the thread? Asking for that space.
Exactly. Asking for that witnessing.
And the source really highlights the gift of true witnessing. When someone actually does stay, really stays through the unspooling, the fragments, the pauses, the seeming tangents.
The answer that finally emerges is different. It's more complete, more connected, more authentic. It carries the mark of that shared time, that shared effort.
And the person feels less alone, right? Less like they're deviant or fundamentally out of step. They feel understood in their natural form.
That's not just inclusion, the source says. That's reciprocity. And for many, it's an incredibly rare and powerful gift.
The material gives us such a powerful case study to see all this in action. Reframing crisis. A case study in Ein Augenblick.
Yeah, that one's intense.
It describes this moment in what sounds like a totally normal staff meeting. But for one person there, someone wired for relational coherence, for atmospheric integrity, it felt like a fundamental breach, a rupture.
And crucially, it wasn't about the specific agenda items being discussed.
No. The source frames it as atmospheric rupture as data. What got disrupted was the underlying ecology of trust. The coherence of the environment itself collapsed.
Maybe due to a pattern of decisions, a subtle power dynamic, a feeling of displacement. Things a highly attuned system reads instantly, not as personal drama, but as critical signal.
It wasn't an overreaction. It was described as informed recognition, based on a lifetime of sensing and navigating these kinds of environmental incoherencies.
Which highlights that fundamental tension, doesn't it? Between GLP design tuned to detect patterns, sense subtle rupture, build meaning through interrelation.
And institutional design, often built to enforce compliance, maybe mask instability, prioritize a certain kind of efficiency over deeper truths.
So when the GLP mind picks up the fracture in the system, the body reacts. And that reaction gets misread by the institution, by the standard view, as a personal meltdown, a problem with the individual.
But the source gives us a totally different interpretation. What's actually happening in that moment is a reconfiguration.
A surge of patterned awareness,
Yeah.
a cascade of gestalts, assembling not out of panic, but for urgent sense-making in the face of that external rupture.
And this happens through what the source calls the inner theater.
Yeah. In that moment of external breakdown, the mind activates this internal space. Not to escape reality, but to reassemble coherence on its own terms, because the external world failed to provide it.
So characters, metaphors, memory fragments come onto the stage, an internal production that's making meaning where none was offered.
It's framed not as dissociation, but as resonant survival. The source even mentions specific elements, like a character named Lysilf, using the seventh point of Stargate as a navigational tool.
Wow.
The smell of a grandmother's coat for grounding, the self-consciously rerouting internal power. The source puts it so powerfully. This wasn't a meltdown. It was a reconfiguration.
And this theater isn't just fantasy. It's framed as sacred technology.
What looks like maybe daydreaming or being out of it is described here as a precision instrument, a processor capable of cross-dimensional integration, trauma resolution, navigating complex patterns.
So in that moment, the system wasn't malfunctioning. It was refusing to participate in external dysfunction.
Exactly. If the world won't offer coherence, the internal system generates it. The standard institutional gaze completely misses this. It sees the problem in the person, not the environment. It sees retreat, not resistance to fragmentation. The interior world becomes a refuge of integrity.
And the outcome in that case study in Augenblick is that the system did self-stabilize. The threat was named internally, the loss processed, self-reassembled, maybe even more precisely than before, making invisible adjustments to keep functioning with integrity in that difficult environment.
And that stunning line, we are not fragile, we are subtle systems. And in the right conditions, we don't collapse, we compose.
We compose. That's beautiful. The source goes on to connect this way of communicating GLP to something older and ancestral and future-bearing lineage.
Yeah, it pushes back against the idea that this is just a modern deficit. Think about how stories were told before clocks ran everything.
By the fire, maybe over seasons.
Exactly. In fragments, through repetition, across seasons, it wasn't just about efficient information transfer. It was about deep meaning transmission. GLP is presented as an echo of that older way of knowing, slower, more attuned to context, pattern, resonance.
The source even mentions Rieser's solitary forager hypothesis, the idea that maybe some autistic minds historically excelled in roles needing deep environmental attunement, amazing spatial memory, long-range pattern sensing.
Strengths that were often quiet, cumulative, maybe unseen as sacred. And crucially, they had time. The rush we feel now, the source argues, that's the rupture. It's not inherent to these minds.
We were never behind. We are still wired for the kind of knowing that can't be hurried. That's powerful.
It really is. And you see echoes of this valuing of resonance over speed in various cultural and neurodivergent traditions too, like call and response patterns, indigenous knowledge systems, where everything's interconnected with what's sometimes called neuroqueer temporality, deliberately bending the clock, folding narratives.
In these frameworks, truth isn't just about what's quickest or most easily summarized. Truth is what resonates, what endures, what holds meaning across time.
Which leads us right to that huge provocative question the source poses. What if we built systems for this?
Yeah. What would our world look like? Our schools, our workplaces, therapy, if they didn't just tolerate GLP communication, but actually honored it, valued it?
Imagine, off-topic gets reframed as contextual depth.
Yeah.
Too slow becomes in process, assembling coherence. Non-compliant becomes attuned to rupture, signaling a problem in the system.
Classrooms where a thought arriving days later is welcomed as vital participation. where using film clips or song lyrics or describing a scent is seen as valid literacy, a valid way to express understanding.
Meetings that build in time for delayed insight to be shared and integrated, therapy that doesn't pathologize metaphor but actually works with it, sees it as diagnostic truth.
The source is clear. This isn't some utopian fantasy. It's presented as a real design possibility. If we shift the core question from what's most efficient to what's actually ethical, what supports genuine understanding.
Because right now, the world, through that lens of urgency, often sees GLP minds as slow, disorganized, maybe scattered.
But what if they're not lagging behind, not lost? What if they're simply oriented to a different horizon of meaning, a deeper, more patterned one?
And that leads to that incredible concluding thought from the source. We are not behind, we are beside, we are beyond.
Beyond.
Suggesting they carry an intelligence, one tuned to nuance, to undercurrents, to finding coherence amid chaos that was once essential for human thriving, and, the source hints, may be essential again.
An intelligence that deserves not just to survive in systems built for speed and superficiality,
But perhaps to lead us towards new ways of knowing and being together.
as the source itself wraps up, it acknowledges that this exploration, this deep dive we've been on, wasn't an elevator pitch either.
Definitely not.
It wasn't about speed or neat packaging. It was offered as a gesture, a constellation, maybe a theater itself, a way in, an immersion. The very form of the original material, sometimes raw, recursive, layered, is part of the argument.
Yeah, the medium is part of the message. This communication isn't deficient, this pace isn't delay, this form isn't disorder.
It is life. It is a way, a valid way. And by exploring it, the source suggests you, the listener, are standing in it now, experiencing it.
So the core invitation coming out of all this seems really clear.
Stop asking for the short version. Stop demanding compression just because it's convenient for you.
If you truly want to understand, if you truly want that connection, you have to be willing to move at the pace of coherence, their pace.
Ask the real question, the deep question.
And then you have to stay long enough to truly hear the answer, in whatever form it arrives.
It's a fundamental shift, isn't it? A reorientation in how we even approach communication, learning to listen differently.
Listening in chords, maybe? Meeting at the speed of resonance, not just the speed of transaction.
So the final question the source leaves you with is, can you stay?
And what would it actually mean for you, for our communities, for our future, if this intelligence, this deep capacity for finding coherence in chaos, were not just allowed to survive, but were finally allowed to lead?
Something profound to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.